Well, hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. And we are going to talk about how you can use coaching and mentoring programs to really build that next generation of leaders in your organization. So my guess is that right now you may have some scattered coaching efforts going on. You might have some mentoring relationships that have either been formally established or have evolved over time. But my guess is that there isn't necessarily a formal program just around how to really match employees to coaches and mentors, and really how to gauge the impact of those relationships. And I say that because I've talked to so many organizations and worked in so many where that was exactly the case. I think there was this kind of common understanding that there was some goodness there, but there wasn't necessarily a formal program. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. I have a couple of slides here that I'm going to pull up as I share my screen, and we will go ahead and get started. All right. All right, so we're going to talk about exactly that, using coaches and mentors to build leaders in your organization. Let's talk a little bit about why you might want to do that, what you need to do, and kind of how you would approach this. So let's go ahead and jump in. For our agenda today, we're going to just do this brief welcome. I have a reflection question for you. I'll talk a little bit about how that kind of why, what, and how you would approach these coaching and mentoring. And then time permitting, we'll have a bit of a discussion. I'll stop the recording at that point. So let's go ahead and dive in. So if you're joining after the fact, if you're listening to this as a recording, I'm going to ask you to just pause for a moment. And actually, I'm going to back up the slide for just 1 second. So I want you to take a minute and answer for yourself what you want most for your team. And if you'll recall, if you've listened to these webinars before, I ask this question often. And the reason that I do that repeatedly is that we often as leaders don't really take the time to kind of sit and think about it. Like of course we have some, ideas, and if kind of pressed, we would be able to come up with something. But right at this moment, I want you to just take a minute and think specifically, what do you want for your team? If you're joining us live, then you can go ahead, and I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to kind of scratch down something on notebook paper. And do not worry at all. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot. So you don't need to share. This is really just for you. But if you're listening to this recorded, go ahead and push pause and just make a couple notes to yourself. What do you want most for your team? Okay, welcome back. Let's go ahead and dive into to the content of today's discussion. So why would you want to formalize any program around coaching and mentoring to build those leaders within your organization? There are several reasons. My guess is that you have a couple in mind. Otherwise, you may not be here today. So you have some in mind. Do they match up with these? The ones that I was kind of thinking about are certainly attracting and retaining top talent. To hear a prospective employer in the interview process talk about a coaching and mentoring program, gosh, that would seem like an incredible benefit and certainly a differentiator because so few organizations have them. For those already within your company, it can be really one of the key ways to retain those high-performing, high-potential people because they feel so connected and valued by the organization that you would make this investment in them. It can also help support all of your DEIA and diversity goals to really make these programs kind of broadly available and ensure that they're super inclusive of all kinds of people in your organization and all backgrounds. Oops, let me back up for a moment. I think the one that's kind of top of mind for many of us in leadership roles is increasing productivity. Are there ways that we can become more focused and support our employees in having more focus by using coaching and mentoring in a way that translates to real productivity that, of course, helps deliver, you deliver projects on time and really, more closely kind of, monitor that bottom line, the business bottom line. So I think that one's an important one. Preparing future leaders. I know what's top of mind for many people in larger organizations is succession planning. How do you ensure that when a position is vacated or someone moves on or is promoted, that there's somebody else there that is ready and able to take on that role so that you don't have any lost time. There's no disruption to the business. Coaching and mentoring can also increase your workforce mobility. So you don't necessarily need to have everybody under the same roof and keeping an eye on them. But with coaching and mentoring, people can become more, better skilled communicators and better able to kind of tie in to the organization as a whole from wherever they are. And lastly, embedding a service culture. So coaching and mentoring can support any of your organizational values. And if having a service culture is one of them, then certainly having an independent, objective person in your employees' work life can be really helpful. What are some ones that you've thought of? If they're different from these and you think maybe it would benefit me to know about them or include them in a future presentation, then certainly shoot me a note. I would love to hear them. All right, so moving on. As you know, I love the data and the studies around any of these, workplace effectiveness and leadership topics. So I always kind of go out looking for kind of what's the latest kind of thinking or studies that have been done around this topic. And so here are a couple. The first one that I wanted to share, it's really about that return on investment. So many leaders, because of course, coaching and mentoring can have some amount of investment, certainly of time, but in some cases, a significant financial investment. And they have this very valid question, like, what am I going to get for this? And sometimes it's really difficult to measure. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in the future or later in the presentation. So, rightfully, I think leaders and organizations are asking, what's the return on investment? So in these two studies, kind of similarly demonstrating that there's this tremendous return on investment. This one done by Metrics Global looked at the impact of executive coaching on members of companies from Fortune 500 organizations. And that study revealed that coaching resulted in a 529% return on investment. And, so that is, they're, measuring productivity, they're measuring growth and revenue increases, but these intangible benefits, such as this increased teamwork, increased just employee engagement, better relationships, and that reduced friction and tension within the organization, that it when you're in it, and it's so distracting that coaching and mentoring kind of helps address that and kind of get people into like a smoother, more cohesive working environment. On a very related note, this study from the Manchester Consulting Group said the average return on investment was 5.7 times that initial investment. So whatever that upfront cost was, there was a significant return on the back end for investing in these programs. And I'll just pause for a moment and think, what might some of those costs be? So coaches, of course, typically have a package rate or an hourly rate, and there's some commitment upfront to doing a certain amount of sessions, and that cost can be significant. Of course, coaches have a tremendous range in terms of their costs and how they work, but nonetheless, there is a financial investment upfront. Mentoring can be different, and it depends on kind of where the mentors are coming from. Typically, mentoring is thought of as something where someone is donating their time. They might be a current employee that's kind of further up in the organization, or maybe from a different part, a different division. They may be somebody that's retired and donating their time back. So in terms of the financial upfront cost, mentoring can be just different than coaching, but either way, what they both share is that investment of time. So by undertaking these programs, the organization and the individual are committing to making that investment of time. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how, like that step-by-step process, how you might build an effective coaching and mentoring program. And before I go into this, I want you to think about this. It works for whether you're focused on coaching, whether you're focused on mentoring, or you're thinking about some combination of the two. But really, that's the first step. So coaching, of course, is people who are very much focused on that objective feedback, working directly with the employee to help discover their goals and aspirations. By contrast, mentoring is someone who's often delivering guidance and providing insight and support that is highly, it's in context, to what that, whatever that employee is challenge they're facing. So coaching is kind of a little bit more independent and kind of focused on goal setting and progress. Mentoring might be more focused on behaviors and really how to kind of navigate internal situations. So either way, this process works, and many organizations, of course, do some kind of hybrid of both of those. So the very first thing that you want to do is design a program that has your goals, your audience, and the appropriate format in mind. And so the questions that you might be asking yourself is really kind of what do we want to accomplish with this? What's our ideal outcome? And really, what are we trying to get employees to do? Who are the right people for this program? The audience is incredibly important too to keep in mind. Is this something that you're offering to just one individual, or is this something you're looking at more holistically as a benefit for a cadre of people at a certain level in the organization, or even potentially expanding it out to all employees? So the audience that you have in mind is something really important to consider upfront, because that's going to have a trickle-down effect in terms of the scope and scale of what you put together. And then the format, so are you looking for something that is going to be very kind of near term, like maybe in person, or people are kind of like actively meeting, maybe live to kind of get these things started? Are you thinking about doing more of a group program where you bring up many people together to do some group coaching or group mentoring? A couple of considerations there at the beginning. The second step is to identify the actual participants. So taking a look at your organization, depending on what you've decided in that first step, who are the people who are the best candidates? What does that pool look like? There's a piece of this that's super important about creating that compelling communications on the benefits of the program, why they would want to participate, and what expectations that you're setting that they would have to fulfill should they participate. Coaching and mentoring is only as good as the desire of the person on the receiving end to receive it. We can't subject someone to coaching. We can't coach and mentor against anyone against their will. So it's really important to keep in mind in terms of when you're identifying your participants, who is willing and able and just eager to make that commitment and do the work and the growth that goes along with it. Once you have those goals in mind and you have your participants identified, you'll then start making matches. Now, this can be delegated to a program manager, or you might be able to do it yourself, but you're going to want to look at that pool of coaches that you have, whether it's procured or identified in the case that you have some internal coaches, and that pool of candidate mentors, those people who've raised their hand and volunteered to be mentors. So you're going to want to put all of that on the table and look at how to make matches. There are a couple of different ways to do this. You can certainly do it randomly. You could look at people who have similar professional backgrounds and experience that might, find kind of more relatedness to each other. You can find people that have similar goals in the organization, or you could simply look at who has the right availability. In my experience, there is no secret key to doing this. I personally believe that you may have as much success with doing it randomly as kind of doing it intentionally. But what is really helpful here, no matter what, is that the click between the coachee or the mentee and the coach or mentor is critically important. Like, they have to be able to work together. And so no matter how you do your matches, what I strongly encourage people to do when they're starting these programs is make it flexible. All of these are, on a trial basis. They agree to do a couple of sessions and get to know each other, confirm that the fit fits and that it's working. And if it's not, it's just raise your hand, let us know, and we're going to make a switch. No hard feelings. coaches and coaches specifically are kind of trained to really not kind of get attached and really recognize this is an important part of the process. Mentors, you might kind of need a little bit more delicate communication, but it is really important to kind of have that escape hatch there, so that if it's not working, that you're not forcing it and you offer some options for people. Okay, so the fourth step would be to supplement the coaching and mentoring with some additional resources. So, of course, there's a lot of work that'll be done in the coaching and mentoring sessions, and then, any homework that happens in between sessions. But it's so useful for people to have a repository of, other types of materials that support their journey. And so those could be guides and workbooks and checklists and articles and those kinds of things that are just easy to find or locate, that they can use to kind of supplement their learning. One thing I think that it's helpful is to make that open to anyone participating to post things that they find useful that they can share with the rest of the group. So it's kind of like a living repository of all of these useful guides and resources. So I'd encourage you to set that up and keep it active and live and kind of fresh. The final step here is measuring your impact. So kind of going back to that initial question about the return on investment, you'll want to kind of monitor how this is all working, of course, whose matches are working or not working, and what kind of change are you seeing. So if you go back to that first question about what is the change that we want to see, it's much easier to then measure whether or not you're seeing that change kind of as you progress through the program. You'll likely have to get pretty creative about how you measure that. To make it as quantifiable as possible, one thing I recommend is that you do a pre-survey and a post-survey. And those survey questions can really focus on those goals and the behavioral changes that you wanted to see as a result of the program, and look for shifts. You use the exact same question set and the same pool of participants, and kind of be able to kind of gauge, the different attitudes and behaviors at the completion of the program. You could also use kind of more anecdotal evidence by interviewing managers or supervisors on kind of behavioral changes they're observing live in that employee's work. And you can also use other business metrics that you're already tracking in terms of maybe, prospective client or deals in the pipeline, revenue growth, profit growth, or any of those other business metrics that you might be using. I think it's difficult to kind of draw those causal relationships between something like coaching and mentoring and business growth. But I think nonetheless, it's useful to kind of look at those in tandem. All right, so moving on. There's some common challenges that I wanted to just share with you with some ideas about how to avoid those. And so this is very much kind of keep in mind those 5 steps that we just went through, and then let's talk about what those challenges might be. So one of the common challenges is that the program design and structure is just not a match for your organization. I personally was involved with being a mentor in a group mentoring program that was set up, and the design, the concept was amazing. It was beautiful. The design flaw was that it was far too time intensive for any of the mentors to be able to participate on a consistent basis. And so the first couple of sessions with the groups were strong, but over time, there were scheduling conflicts, and it just became really difficult to make sure that a mentor was present in each session. So the program kind of fell apart. It was a program design that was just kind of flawed from the very beginning. It just wasn't sustainable. So thinking through what will be sustainable from the very beginning has to be a consideration in your initial design. One thing to think about is having these programs time-bound so that it doesn't feel like this never-ending journey. I it's both kind of important for coachees to feel like they have a start and an end and like a constrained time in which they're going to work with this particular coach. It's also really important for mentors and mentees to be able to sustain that energy. So I like kind of setting some time parameters around any of these programs. Of course, you can always renew and re-up and kind of keep it going for those things that are working, but it gives you kind of a set start and end time to kind of gauge what is working or what that right fit is for you. Another challenge is finding those skilled mentors and coaches. This can be a hurdle, kind of depending on your industry and your budget, to really kind of find those people. So there are organizations online that are kind of associations or groups where you can find coaches, where you can get a number of coaches or review like a number of backgrounds and resumes and so forth, kind of all in one place, which I think are really useful. Mentors can be really a different story, because again, mentors typically come either from within your organization or kind of from an adjacent field, somebody kind of affiliated with your industry. Putting out a call for mentors, of course, is an important first step, just to understand how many volunteers or people who are interested might be available. But mentors should be effectively vetted to ensure that they're clear on their role and the goals of your program. I think it can be problematic when a mentor kind of has their own agenda about, how they want to guide a particular situation, or they see this as an opportunity to really fulfill something that they weren't able to do in their career, or any kind of like other weird, objective that they might have. So I think you need a screening process to make sure that those people really are clear on what you're trying to accomplish, and that they're able to kind of make the commitment that you're looking for. Related to that lack of commitment and engagement, when participants or your employees don't feel like they're getting anything out of it, they drop out. We just do. You kind of you ghost your coach or your mentor. You just kind of, everybody's busy, and they just find other important things to do with their time. So the solution to this, I think, is partly what I was saying before about making these programs time bound, so that it just doesn't feel like this never ending process. I think the other important thing is being really clear up front about what that time commitment is going to look like, so people know what to expect going in. And then the third piece is working with managers and supervisors to provide that second level of support and help the employee free up that time and make it okay for them to participate. Limited resources or budget constraints. You can set up these programs, especially a mentoring program, with a very limited financial budget in mind. So I don't think that lack of resources or financial resources should be an inhibiting, a factor that makes you not get started. However, if you want to do something at scale, or there's a certain caliber of coaches, or any other number of scenarios, lack of resources and budget can absolutely be a real issue. So I think, at least on the coaching side, you can often kind of sit down with your coach or your pool of coaches, kind of talk through what you have in mind in terms of the budget, and see what kind of creative solutions they may offer in terms of how to work with you. They might be open to doing a group where you get kind of more bang for your buck in terms of people going through the process. They might be able to reduce the number of sessions, or there might be some wiggle room in terms of like how they scope it. Measuring that effectiveness of that return on investment. We talked about this a couple of slides back. So it can be really difficult to just directly see the impact of mentoring and coaching. So you got to get creative, because it's so important to whoever. It's important to all of us, but especially to the person who is making that time and that financial investment, to know what they're getting out of it. So that's why I strongly encourage kind of getting clear upfront about how you're going to measure that, what specific outcomes that you're looking for. So you just know what you're looking for, and then knowing like whatever creative approach you're going to use to measure that impact. So it could be pre and post surveys, like I said, it could be other business metrics, and I think anecdotal feedback from managers and supervisors can be useful as well. All right, lastly, and we haven't talked about this, but organizational culture and any resistance to change. So there are certainly some organizations, there are certain times in particular, like organizational maturity, where any employee, leadership or staff included, just feel resistance to change. They might feel like they have some change fatigue. Maybe a lot has been changing over a period of time and it just feels hard. Maybe nothing has changed in decades, and so they're just really entrenched in their ways. But kind of where your organization is in terms of their openness to change. And so I think going back to kind of overcome this challenge and address it, really thinking about that during the design process and how you communicate that why this program is important to you, kind of your expectations in terms of what you're going to get out of it and the benefit to those who participate, and this openness and encouraging people to really adopt that growth mindset and that openness to change, that they're really working in a safe space. All right, so moving on, in the couple minutes that we have left, what I wanted to kind of related to that resistance and that, people who may be in an organization that has some change fatigue, looking at how you can create a culture of continuous learning by using coaching and mentoring. So the opposite of resistance to change would be a culture of continuous learning. This really is the antidote to that. And this is this idea that part of our culture, we value learning and growth, certainly as it relates to our business and our mission, but also just for the sake of learning and growing, because we think as humans, that makes our work more fulfilling, and it just makes us ultimately happier. So creating this culture of continuous learning, if you don't have one, or it's not really front and center right now in your organization, is something really to consider. And here are some ways that you can think about doing that. One is to just recognize where you are and really set your intention for creating a culture that values and supports continuous learning. So just making that decision and putting it out there, I think, is absolutely the first step. Imagining what's possible. So if you were to shift or kind of expand this culture of continuous learning, what would change? What would be opened up in your business that would create more opportunities for professional growth, business opportunities? Like, what happens when people kind of become lifelong learners? So kind of doing that imagination process and really starting to set a goal around like whatever that vision is for what that future culture would look like. Getting the word out. So once you kind of set your intention and you have some ideas about what your vision would be, is starting to communicate with people. Hey, this is where we're going. We're going to really expand and double down on our commitment to this continued learning in a way that we haven't before. And so, talk to people about why you're doing that, like what that is going to look like in their day-to-day work, how that's going to benefit them. And really important is that you create a feedback loop here so that you hear from other people, like when they hear that message, what's their reaction? Do they get excited? Like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is, I can see so many advantages to me that I really want to pursue. Or are they skeptical? Or are they angry for some reason? It's just creating that opportunity for people to be part of a two-way conversation on what creating that culture looks like. Together then with the employees, certainly with your managers, like identifying those specific behaviors that demonstrate that you do in fact have a culture of continuous learning. One of the most important kind of behaviors around this particular culture is lack of judgment. And in a work setting, that's really, really hard for us because we're often in the position of evaluating performance and gauging progress on things. But when it comes to professional growth, bringing this mindset of a judgment-free zone where it makes it completely free and open for people to kind of learn from wherever they are is essential to people participating in that process. So that's just one example in terms of a judgment-free zone. But I think, what are those other specific behaviors that you would expect or want to see? All right, next, capturing and creating those resources. So I feel like we all have so much stuff and it is all over the place, even with all of these great collaboration tools, and we make efforts to kind of bring it all together. And then over time, it's like my closet, it kind of gets messy again and I get it all organized. So unless you have somebody that's really on top of this, our resources are probably spread out. So taking this opportunity to kind of bring all that stuff together, making it super easy for people to, well, one, know that it exists and what's there, to be able to find what they're looking for. So making it searchable and enabling people to contribute over time so that you can kind of stay fresh with all of the new stuff that's coming in. And then lastly is recognizing and rewarding those behaviors. So once you know what those specific behaviors are and you see someone doing them, making a big deal about it. So recognizing them, certainly like, so that I want to say like kind of to their face. I don't know that it has to be in person, but really acknowledging what you see them doing and how you think that is very much in line with this direction you're going in terms of building this culture. And then to the extent that you can kind of reward people for doing that in whatever reward systems you have, will help other people see that when you adopt these behaviors and you make this investment for yourself, that it's recognized and rewarded. All right. So that's really the thought I wanted to leave you with in terms of the importance of creating this continuous learning culture. And coaching and mentoring supports that because your coaches and mentors are there to amplify and really kind of reinforce those goals that you have. And so this is an important one. All right, so that's all I have for you today. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and take any questions that you have. Again, if you're watching this recorded, please don't ever hesitate to shoot me an email at robin@robincamroat.com. I would love to answer any of your questions. And thanks for watching.